Okay, it seems like it's been a long time since I made a video, but here I am. Wanted to respond to a video, part 6 in a series on Game B that, I think part 6, maybe part 7, sorry, that Liberatemankind did on Game B. And in this one he takes on the the nagging issue, for me at least, of what is Game B? How do you define it? With the effect that he proceeded to do much of the same kind of a move that a lot of people have done, which is to say that it's really hard to define and to give some reasons. You can watch this video on that if you want his reasons. But I guess, let me put it this way. I finally discovered a way in which I can agree on this idea of not defining Game B well. Or at least I should say, maybe that's not right. Maybe it's more that I think I've discovered a good reason why it's had such a hard time being defined. I would suggest that what this concept actually is trying to do is provide something like a filter. There's an analogy he gives in his video in which he speaks about a baby, and you want to nurture a baby and that kind of thing, and you don't want to force it to be what it is become. You can't force it to become. It's going to become what it is, and that you basically want to protect it. I think Game B is not the baby. I think Game B is the environment you create to protect the baby. And the reason, in fact, it's more than just a baby, it's more of an entire nursery. We need to be open to 100 different ways of solving this Game B issue. The Game A issue. So the issue is, if Game B is the filter and not the end, then that is a more fitting explanation than any other I've heard for why it is not as well defined. But it also means that when people, this happens often, when people come up with new ideas and try to say, hey, I've got this new idea for Game B, we could do such and such and so and so. And then people go, that's not Game B. At least that's my impression of how they react a lot of the time. Because they're trying to filter out the Game A influences, and they're trying to keep things open so that all these different babies can grow, right? So, but that's a problem. Like, it's a problem to try to shut people down for their creative insights. Even if you feel like there's been all these people that have run into these Game B forums and are just kind of spewing new ideas all over the place, and nobody's ever doing anything productive. I understand that's a problem, but innovation doesn't always happen on the level of practicality. Innovation often happens on these funky dreamer levels that can be so annoying to people who want to just be told, just have a concrete thing that can be done. So what I'm suggesting is that if we understand that Game B is the filter and not the baby, then the response to these new ideas and these energetic, thoughtful people who haven't got a real product yet, they're just playing around with ideas, is okay. That's potentially one of the things that is, how do we say that? That is, we could call it a sub-project of Game B, or we could say it is Game B compliant. I think that's probably better, because you don't want to force people to have the Game B label. You just want to be able to say, well, they're Game B compliant. So, for instance, there's a project I've become aware of called the Babel Project, I believe. And there's several other projects I've seen, including my own, that are definitely Game B compliant, but are not Game B. And when I go into a Game B server, I generally find a lot of Game B compliant ideas, or perhaps methods of filtration of game A ideas, but I don't see much I don't see much production, because anytime you try to product somebody, some game B person tells you why you shouldn't do it for some reason, and I find that bizarre. I know they'd probably say, no, we're not trying to shut him down, we're just trying to push him into a more practical way of thinking. It's fine, but I don't know. I find their approach ghastly, to be honest, and more aligned with... Okay, let me switch gears now. So I've spoken to so far about this idea of maybe game B is a filter instead of a movement, if you will, or it's a movement of filters that is intended to give a clean space for various game B compliant projects to start. Oh shoot, don't let me see your thought. Okay, here it is. The other side of this is that I think we need to be careful how we filter game A out, because it seems clear to me that there are types of game A that are useful and needed. And so here is my criteria that I'm going to lay out. I'm going to say that there is deep game A, or deep rivalries, and then there are thin rivalries. And that is not a great criteria yet, so let me see if I can tighten it up. So the criteria is something like when a rivalrous act or a rivalrous attitude or project or movement, business, whatever it is, when it is acting game A in a deeply game A way or a deeply rivalrous way, that means that not only... Okay, let me talk about thin real quick. Thin is the idea of, like, if you and me are playing a game and I'm trying to beat you, we are rivals. But we understand that when the game's over, we're both friends, or at least, that's a very, very thin rivalry. It might get deeper if you have taken extremely seriously how what you think of the other team's fans and of that team. Sometimes sports gets ridiculously rivalrous, and that means it's getting deeper. They're yelling at each other, they're making fun of each other, they're doing lots of frankly childish stuff over a game. Now we know how I feel about sports. Anyway, but when you are at the level of trying to win money, like a business or a political party, money or power basically, is what it is, to the degree that you are not only you're trying to expand the reach of the game, you're trying to expand more and more power, so that you are trying to get away with pollution, and you're trying to get away with an inferior product, and you're trying to get away with misinformation. That's when it gets truly deep, is when misinformation starts coming in, which of course to a certain degree all ad campaigns have become about misinformation. Maybe they were always about misinformation. They've just become more complicated. So at that point, the rivalry is so deep that you are being rivalrous against your the people who are trying to buy your product, against your competitors, against your workers, against your against the state itself, as you try to manipulate the state into doing things that'll help you make more money, increase your profit margin. It becomes everyone is your rival except the investors. The investors become your only ally. If that is the kind of level of deep rivalry that I'm talking about, and we can't. How do I say this? The capacity for the human race to get their stuff together and develop a whole new level of working together and finding the good for all, such that we don't destroy ourselves through pollution or biological warfare or resource depletion or building systems of business and government that are fragile instead of anti-fragile. These are all things we are doing right now because of our rivalrous dynamics, where we don't see the big picture. And I will say that I think a huge part of this rivalry thing is just not seeing the big picture. We're not seeing the game in common, the game we have in common, which is survival and thriving. We should all have that game in common. And so long as there are, entire communities of homeless people in various parts of our country, we're not doing that. And yes, there's much to be said about the responsibility those individuals have for where they are, but there is also a hell of a lot more to say about the limits of opportunity that they have. I guess I'm done with this part of the conversation. I will try to pick up on more points of what are deep rivalry and thin rivalry, because I think we can explore a whole categorization of different levels of rivalry, such that we can then begin better identifying what form of rivalry is happening in certain situations, hopefully be able to call it out quickly and avoid it. But I also, again, I want to point out that if we are able to recognize that Game B is a filter and not a project, then we are better equipped to handle new ideas that try to flow into a Game B space. You've got a new idea. Great. Try to develop it according to, by making sure that you filtered these things out. You better find other people to work on it with, because none of us can do this alone. That's part of the whole point of Game B, is that we're all working together, etc. But what I'd like to see happen on the forums, the YouTube channels, the Discord, all that is not. That's not Game B. Okay, fine. That's not the goal. Game B is not the goal. Game B is the filter. So let's enable people, not by shutting them down, but by giving them the tools they need to progress. Thank you.